Let's talk about Joe Manchin, America's number one Republican, America's most famous and most powerful Republican member of Congress. Joe Manchin, of course, is functionally a Democrat. So, Charlie Kirk won't even let you have Juneteenth, so you can get like 5% off at Kohl's. But what Charlie Kirk does love, it's like if you want to vote as a black person or as a poor person, you literally have to wait in line for 3.5 hours minimum. Okay, these are the rules, boys. I don't make them. This is the future Republicans want. Okay, if you're poor, we don't want you to vote. If you're black, we definitely don't want you to vote. And if you're still gonna vote, like, we'll make it as humanly hard as possible. And so what Stacey Abrams is talking about here is Joe Manchin's opposition to the voting rights legislation that passed through the House and is coming to the Senate now, which would at least offer some kind of federal control to normalize and regulate this voting process. This is the future Republicans want. I'm a Republican and no, it isn't. Yeah, well, you're too stupid to recognize that, like, what you want as an individual Republican has nothing to do with what, like, the Republican Party wants in an effort to get reelected. So, nice of you to think that, like, you as an individual Republican have any say, but you're a Republican. So, you know, you're unironically voting against your best judgment and voting against your self-interest anyway, much like many liberals are as well. Don't get me wrong. But with like some extra seasoning of racism. Imagine thinking that either party's politicians represent your interests or wants in any meaningful capacity, which is pretty funny. But like, I love that this dude he wasn't even embarrassed about saying that he's a Republican. Anyway, as soon as Stacey Abrams embraced Joe Manchin's compromise voting rights legislation today, Senate Republicans vowed all-out opposition. John Harwood here talks about how in Clinton's 1993 deficit reduction plan, there were 0 Republican votes. Obama's 2010 health care plan, 0 Republican votes, despite the fact that they acted like they were going to vote for it and made sure that the Democrats compromise with them, you know. For Biden's 2021 COVID relief plan, there were 0 Republican votes. To assume that, like, Republicans are going to vote for any Democratic policy, specifically ones that are written to maintain federal control over states' rights to, you know, not allow black people or poor people to vote in general, you're delusional. It is at the heart of the Republican strategy. This is how Republicans get elected, okay? By stopping as many people from voting as possible. So please, stop being weird about this. Anyway,
absolutely.
Stacey Abrams maybe called Joe Manchin's bluff, maybe is like willing to compromise. I don't know why Stacey Abrams, who unironically like made a name for herself in the national level by like making it easier and encouraging more you know, black and brown people to vote in the state where she lost an election, is now turning around and being like, yeah, we should compromise on this legislation. But let's look at this.
Support.
Absolutely. What Senator Manchin is putting forward are some basic building blocks that we need to ensure that democracy is accessible no matter your geography. And those provisions that he is setting forth are strong ones that will create a level playing field, will create standards that do not vary from state to state, and I think will ensure that every American has improved access to the right to vote despite the onslaught of state legislation seeking to restrict access to the right to vote.
Is that a compromise you could support?
Absolutely. What Senator Manchin is putting forward are...
So like I said, I don't know if this is a bluff, like a calling out Manchin's bluff type situation. Of course, Republicans immediately moved against this compromise anyway. Like, Joe Manchin has nothing. Like, he has no power. Republicans don't give a fuck about Joe Manchin. They care about Joe Manchin as far as like Joe Manchin defends them. And he defends them by being like the main hurdle and being like a beacon, a magnet of all of the negative reactions. So that's why you talk about Joe Manchin when like literally not a single fucking Republican is going to vote for this bill anyway. But the reason why he can get away with this is because he's a Democrat in West Virginia. Okay? Like, he's a Democrat in a deep, deep, deep red state. Now, he's not really a Democrat, but he's a D voter. And that's part of the reason why. Why is he still in office if it's just a dumb fuck doing nothing? I mean, the point is, Joe Manchin's existence is defended and legitimized because Democrats say he's there for the right votes. He's an additional Democratic voter for all of the important votes. Well, he hasn't really been showing up for a lot of these important votes, so I don't know. He's a Dem in a very hard red state, yes. Ladies and gentlemen, West Virginia is 35.4 in the red, okay? This is not like there is no, it doesn't happen. What Joe Manchin does not, like, what Joe Manchin is doing is not an easy thing to be a Democrat in a fucking hardcore red state, okay? Having said that, though, you know, if he's not going to do shit, then who gives a fuck? Yeah, he allows for Dem-appointed judges to be brought to the floor. Exactly. I say we focus our efforts on, you know, widening that fucking tight margin that we have in the Senate. Well, not even really a margin. It's just like one extra vote from Kamala Harris as best as we can. Stop calling West Virginia a dog shit state. They've just been fooled by social disagreements. Dude, West Virginia sucks, dude. I'm sorry. It's so bad. It's literally a fucking developing nation. And constantly and consistently voting against their self-interest. Now, the real reasons for why West Virginia is the way it is because of, like, how much... like, West Virginia is basically what's happening in West Philadelphia. It's basically what's happening in Ohio. But it already happened in West Virginia with the evisceration of coal mining. Okay? Unions are done. Unions go away. There's no party apparatus that like churns out Democratic voters. Republicans come in with like reactionary garbage and literally say, hey, if you're Mountain Mama, take me home. Like, I will never forget that one of these fucking European NGOs that unironically like hella drops medical aid to African nations came to West Virginia in a similar capacity to help out the people there. And these hogs are still like, I love Donald Trump. I don't care. West Virginia was once the start of lefty causes like unionizing. Now we're bootlickers. Yeah. Cucks. UN Senate investigator said the Appalachian states was as impoverished as some developing nations. Yeah. 100%. I wonder why. I'm from West Virginia. It's not as bad as HasanAbi says, but he's not very far off. I mean, there are still wealthier parts of West Virginia, but overall, it's dog shit. It's terrible. And by the way, it's white people too. So that's the other part of it. Like, because if you go to the South, you see areas that are in a dire need of help, right? Those areas oftentimes in the South aren't rural areas predominantly occupied by white people, even though there are plenty of very poor white neighborhoods, but it's mostly black and brown neighborhoods that are impoverished like that, right? West Virginia is a great example of how much the Republican Party treats poor white people like they're black people. Okay? Like the disdain that that Republicans have for poor people, is even poor whites, is perfectly demonstrated in a state like West Virginia. They don't give a fuck. Maybe not to the same degree as black people, let's be real. But, you know, they just don't give a fuck. Typical Hasan shit take Abi trying to paint white people as evil? What? The average fucking, the average mind of a reactionary fucking voter, dude. I'm literally talking about helping poor white people in West Virginia, and you are unironically like, oh, you must hate whites, and saying that, like, white people are evil. Anyway, I used to go to West Virginia to help repair houses. A lot of houses in poor areas in Appalachia didn't even have running water or electricity, and they still love voting for fucking Donald Trump and the Republican Party. Now, that doesn't mean that they deserve it. That doesn't mean that they deserve the conditions they're in. No one deserves to live in those conditions, man. Like I'm saying, we're the wealthiest nation on the fucking planet. We're the wealthiest nation throughout history. And we have parts of our country that are in such a horrible, horrible situation. I mean, it resembles, thank you, Betelgeuse. It resembles a developing nation. That's crazy. You're missing the point. We know they treat us like shit, but the Dems don't give a shit either. Hence why most don't vote. And if they do, Dems still won't do anything either. I mean, look at the Democrat that is getting voted into office in West Virginia. This chat is why Southern people feel abandoned by the North. Like, of course they don't deserve to live this way. Yeah. I mean, I stress this all the time, dude. I don't give a fuck if you're racist. You still deserve healthcare. Like, I'm not in the business of, like, stopping universal programs because it ends up helping racist people too. If anything, that's how people become less racist. How people become more trusting in their government to actually help them. We had coal mining and now we're left with heroin addictions. Literally most of the bathrooms in Huntington, West Virginia have blue lights in them, so it's harder for people to shoot up. Yeah, that's what fucking happens when your industry is eviscerated. One, partially as a consequence of like automation, partially because like it's already a brutal industry to begin with. And when your local government does absolutely nothing to like change your situation, there are no subsidies to like bring in different industries into your state. Okay? And your unions are fucking eviscerated as a consequence of your industry being eviscerated. That's what you're left with. You're left with crippling heroin addictions to deal with the massive amounts of problems. Now you might be thinking, West Virginia, Joe Manchin, Mountain Mama, he behaves in the way that he does because he wants to maintain the attitude that he is like a Republican or because he's conservative. Well, except like, you know, his advocacy oftentimes is exactly the opposite of what even people in West Virginia believe. People all around the country are much more progressive when it comes to individual issues than our two-party system lets on. Okay? People might not enjoy voting for the Democratic Party. People might hate the Democratic Party. People might hate the Republican Party. People vote for the most part on you know, party lines. 80% of Americans don't have any ideological POV when they're voting. They only vote on party lines. But what people do like is progressive policies, like increasing the minimum wage to $15, which won in California, like legalizing marijuana, which won in numerous states. Even red states that have done their very best not to expand Medicare or Medicaid have finally expanded with ballot measures. When it's not associated with like a Democratic Party member, people love that shit. They vote for that shit. Majority of West Virginians want to increase the minimum wage to $15. A majority. Joe Manchin stood in opposition against that. So it's not even about like doing what's popular or even doing what's good for his constituents. What is it about? It's about doing what's right for Joe Manchin, about his own personal branding project, okay? That's what Joe Manchin is doing. Branding for Joe Manchin. That's all it is. Now, there was leaked audio. Shouts out to The Intercept, Ryan Grimm and Lee Fong, for intercepting this Zoom meeting that Joe Manchin had with a bunch of millionaire donors, where he was talking about the necessity for moderates to win and how much these millionaire donors are great because like they give these guys like Joe Manchin an outsized influence because they have the backing of these billionaire and millionaires, and that helps people, that helps other legislators like defend them. Anyway, so let's hear what AOC had to say about Joe Manchin's audio leaking. Now, Joe Manchin also stated that he was not actually directly trying to raise campaign funds, because that would be a clear violation of the law if it's not appropriately stated. In that meeting that he was having, in that Zoom call, he was just simply educating people on lobbying and the influence that wealthy people have over American politics.
There was audio leaked yesterday on The Intercept about the senator's conversations with big donors and saying, hey, cut me a break on the commission. We should be negotiating with each other as colleagues, not with billionaires and donors, period. Our policies should be with other public servants and our colleagues.
Yeah. He was going to vote for tax breaks for the rich under Trump until McConnell said fuck off. Yeah. That was an incredible revelation. I'm not going to show you the audio because it's like dog shit. It's garbage. It's not going to work. You're not going to hear it. But one of the interesting things was that it's like ultimate leftist audio. One of the interesting things was that he was openly stating that he was going to vote for tax cuts for the wealthy in 2017 until Mitch McConnell turned around and told him, like, we don't need this to be bipartisan. Fuck off. Last day. And he was bummed out. Anyway, here, let's watch the rest of what Stacey Abrams had to say about Joe Manchin.
What could you support? He has now laid it out. Some of those proposals would be significant changes in requirements from state to state. Is that a compromise you could support?
Absolutely. What Senator Manchin is putting forward are some basic building blocks that we need to ensure that democracy is accessible no matter your geography. And those provisions that he is setting forth are strong ones that will create a level playing field, will create standards that do not vary from state to state, and I think will ensure that every American has improved access to the right to vote despite the onslaught of state legislation seeking to restrict access to the right to vote.
You could accept this compromise, what Joe Manchin laid out, even if voter ID was part of it.
That's one of the fallacies of Republican talking points that have been deeply disturbing. No one has ever objected to having to prove who you are to vote. It's been part of our nation's history since the inception of voting. What has been problematic is the type of restrictive ID that we've seen pop up. In South Dakota, where Native Americans were...
Listen, voter ID is, on its face, something that seems very smart, right? You're like, why the fuck wouldn't you use an identification to vote? Okay, so here's how it works in America. One, not everybody has a driver's license, unfortunately. It's not as easy as it is in other countries where there's like a national identification that you can get, like New Zealand and Turkey, right? It doesn't exist in America, unfortunately. Also, on top of that, the way that voter ID is utilized, like voter ID laws are utilized in this country, is to, one, make it as difficult as possible for certain people to go out and get IDs, right? And then also on top of that, use the voter ID measure as another metric, or rather use these new hurdles as another way to justify purging as many black people from the voting rolls as possible. So it's not always just like voter ID. It's what accompanies those voter suppression bills. Like, for example, You look at something like signature matching, right? And you're like, well, what the fuck? Why won't you? Why won't you use signature matching? That seems like a reasonable bill. Well, it's what they do with signature matching that is the problem. They'll be like, all right, we're gonna enforce signature matching, which is already like a fucking unproven, untested science. They will go into black and brown neighborhoods or poor neighborhoods and be like, well, we got to look at the signature matches here. Boom, eviscerated. 10,000 votes here, 10,000 votes there. The signatures didn't match. I'm sorry. They must be fucking fake voters. It's just another way for people to say, this looks sus, throw it out. So while on its face, it seems like a protective measure that is reasonable, the real reason for why they have these measures or want to implement these measures is so that they can purge as many votes as possible to help Republicans win. Now, why do I say this? Because in this country, we don't have a problem with too many people voting. We have a problem with too little people voting. We don't have a national holiday to vote, which is deliberate, which is on purpose, so that if you have a job, it's as hard as possible for you to vote. Okay? We have all of these initiatives. We purge people, specifically a lot of a lot of black and brown people from voter ballots. We purge them from voter registrations without letting them know. And then you're just sitting there thinking like, why the fuck didn't I get my registration in the mail? Well, you got purged and no one fucking told you. These are all deliberate ways to stop poor people from going out to vote. And it is incredibly undemocratic. Okay? That's why Democrats push back against these initiatives and fail to do so, so it doesn't really matter. But it's at the heart of the Republican strategy of eliminating certain people from the right to vote, robbing people's right to vote as best as they can at the systemic level. Okay? And the justifications for it are ridiculous. It is built upon a foundation of falsehoods. Those falsehoods are that the elections are routinely stolen by undocumented immigrants, by people who shouldn't be voting, by people who vote twice, by people who are, voting in a fraudulent manner. These are the common Republican narratives that you hear all the time as it pertains to voting. Right? Except there is no evidence whatsoever. And as a matter of fact, there's evidence to show that that is a falsehood. There's evidence to show from Republican think tanks that absolutely, without a fucking doubt, without a shred of a doubt, show that voter fraud does not happen at all. Like, it is so marginal. It is so insanely marginal. And this is not just Democratic think tanks. I'm talking about the fucking American Enterprise Institute, Heritage Foundation. Numerous Republican, straight up Republican think tanks have tried to tackle this issue and create this narrative that voter fraud is systemic and it's happening all the time and we need to stop it, and have come short. George W. Bush created a commission for election integrity. That commission found no evidence of voter fraud that is beyond just like marginal voter fraud. It's like one vote, one guy here, two guys there. Donald Trump created an election integrity committee, which he quietly closed down 1 year later. Why didn't you hear about that? Dude, you're making a lot of claims. Just asking for sources is all. Dude, Google is your friend. I've covered this story a million fucking times. If you want to go back and look at my YouTube, you can. Here, I mean, this is the most comprehensive Republican fucking study ever conducted on voter fraud. Over the course of more than 1 billion ballots casted, the Heritage Foundation, which is a right-wing think tank, found 1,328 proven instances of voter fraud. over billions of votes that were casted over the course of 30 fucking years. That's a Heritage Foundation think tank. That's a Republican. That's as Republican as it gets. So this is the best evidence they have for voter fraud? 1,328 instances of voter fraud over the course of 30 years. So even their proof, even what they consider to be proof, is proof that it's marginal and insignificant because it doesn't fucking happen. I am using the most right-wing and the most cited study that Republicans love to show. Also, the irony here is that a big chunk of the fraudulent voters, you would be shocked to maybe find out, are Republicans. So that's the other part of the equation that's also hilarious. Almost all of the high-profile instances of voter fraud happen with Republicans. Like that guy whose wife died and then he fucking voted for her with an absentee ballot. But there has never been like organized voter fraud, and it would have to be organized voter fraud to sway the outcome of an election. And it's always like tiny incidents here and there over the course of 30 to 40 years with 1,328 instances. Like, that's so stupid. You don't need to add additional measures if something is this successful at preventing fraud from happening. And this is precisely why I find it rather strange that there is this narrative. But I also find it strange that people act like Donald Trump's takes on voter fraud was different than the rest of the Republican Party. Now, if you don't understand where I'm coming from, this is the Heritage Foundation. So they wrote this, they put together the study to act like voter fraud was a big problem. Now, let me show you one of the founders of the Heritage Foundation. The real problem in our voting process has always been about voter suppression, not voter fraud. Anyway, here, this is Paul Weyrich. He's the founding father of the conservative movement, the modern conservative movement. Here he is addressing a gathering held in Dallas. This guy also went on to, again, be responsible for the Heritage Foundation. Let's hear what he had to say.
Now, many of our Christians have what I call the goo-goo syndrome. Good government. They want everybody to vote. I don't want everybody to vote. Elections are not won by a majority of people. They never have been from the beginning of our country, and they are not now. As a matter of fact, our leverage in the elections, quite candidly, goes up as the voting populace goes down.
He just straight up said it, dude. He founded the Heritage Foundation, and they're still trying. And you're a fucking idiot for believing in this shit. Hook, line, and sinker. There it is. Trump said the exact same shit, too. Doesn't matter. Doesn't fucking matter to most Republicans, though. So there it is.